Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the video on ancestor worship. The next religious behavior that Simon and Palmer discuss is totemism. Simon and Palmer say totemism is an extension or embellished form of ancestor worship. They hypothesize that totemism allows for people to identify more sharing partners from greater distances. This model shows just that. Agents that practice totemism in blue in the model behave exactly the same way as ancestor worshipers in green. They move the same, they share the same amount of resources, they reproduce the same, they behave exactly the same. The only difference with totemism and between totemism and ancestor worship agents here is that totemism agents identify sharing partners from further away. It's a difference of 4 blocks for totemism compared to only 2 blocks for ancestor worshipers. Let's see what kind of effect this little boost in adaptability has on our 3 sets of agents. Again, like in our ancestor worship, we have selfish agents, which only consume, reproduce, reproduce. Our ancestor worshipers, or AW here on the right here, they behave exactly the same as in the last model. They only share with each other. There's no more PA or pure altruism. We've just switched it to ancestor worship strategy. And then we also have totemism here. Totemism, again, these agents behave the exact same way as the greens, the ancestor worshipers. They just get a little bit of a boost when it comes to identifying sharing partners. And if you do end up setting your disregard level to a certain level to test what effect that has on the populations, those will be labeled in orange. So like before, we are going to hit setup and go /pause. We should expect both the blues and the greens, the totemisms and the ancestor worshipers, to both outcompete the red. Obviously, there's a little bit of a starting up period. The model has to kick into gear, but already we're seeing the reds dip down. And again, these models are terribly random in terms of movement, direction, and in terms of the placement of the resources. But this is, it's finally starting to come into play as the more selfish groups are being, or sorry, the more selfish agents are depleting in population size. What is surprising here, and is something that may or may not happen when you run these models, is that our blues are kind of tapering off at about the 50% range. Now, they have the ability to identify more sharing partners from a greater distance. In certain aspects, depending on the concentration of the resources, this may not be necessarily an adaptation. Although I will say, if I were to let this model run for a lot longer, which I'm going to kind of show the point of this model, eventually this little teeny itty bitty boost in adaptation for the blues should, after a lot, especially once these resources begin to become more depleted, this boost in the ability to identify more sharing partners should win out. And now I suppose we play the waiting game. We're only at 150 ticks, so there's only been 15 reproductive sessions, if you will. Now, don't think this is embarrassing. Oh, you know, it's not doing what I thought it would do. 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, those who practice totemism get more of a head start. And again, we only reached 200. The model is slowing down. It's not running as quickly because now we have 3 agent sets. But I tried to make these models as fair as possible. I didn't think it would teach anybody anything or do anybody any good if I gave the blues or the totemisms a huge advantage all the time so that they would just win and I would be right every time. The only advantage they have is that they can identify sharing partners from further away. Well, I'm going off script here. Let's start a fire. Let's burn away some of these resources to where the increased sharing capacity of the blues really takes off, hopefully. Although hopefully the blues are not as, their population is strong enough to hold that. We'll see. So I started a fire at about 300. We'll see what effect it has. So now there's less resources. Sharing becomes a much more needed strategy to survive. And we did see kind of a pinching effect. And that fire, being able to share and identify more sharing partners, has had the hypothesized effect. Hopefully it stays. It has had the hypothesized effect of increase in population size here. And yeah, once I hit that fire, I burnt down 36% of the resources. Sharing became a lot more important. And this is what, these are the cool things I love about these models, is it doesn't always go right the first time. I'm pretty sure if I were to just sit back and reset this entire model, we would likely find those who practice totemism to outcompete purely ancestor worshipers. And like I said before, 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, when you hit this setup button and you hit go, the blues outcompete the greens a lot more readily, a lot quicker. But after that fire had a drastic effect on both populations. And when there are less resources up for grabs, being able to identify more sharing partners from a larger distance is adaptive. I'm actually kind of glad that I was able to, that the model didn't go exactly as I had planned. But just to hopefully I'm not terribly unlucky, just to show what I was talking about in terms of 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, let's pause this, let's restart it, and let's go again. Again, these models are random. The actors or the agents start off in random locations. They move in random directions, and the placement of the resources is also random. So we're just going to give a few seconds for the model to kick in. My computer only has 2 processors, so it's not the fastest computer in the West, but we're starting to see what the effects Stedman and Palmer might hypothesize occur a bit quicker than before, where the blues have come out on top quite rapidly. We would also expect, like I said before, that both the blues and greens should outcompete the reds. The sharing amongst themselves is very adaptive. Now keep in mind, maybe I didn't mention it before, I didn't. Greens only share with greens here, and blues only share with blues. So there's no mixing going on. But this is what you would expect to see 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10 when you rerun this model. And so it's the more probable event that the blues or the people that practice totemism will outcompete the greens. And the reason we see totemism everywhere we do is probably because this behavior is well adapted for areas with less resources, where sharing is a big deal. Because if you remember in the last demonstration or the last model run, the second I started that fire, it was a very drastic effect. And the thing is, I started the fire, and technically the greens should have still done well, and they did. They didn't die. They did a lot better than the reds would have done. But that teeny little boost in adaptation, that little extra tiny little oomph in the right direction, even though both groups share, the blues share just a little bit more effectively. And so what we're seeing here is definitely more indicative of what this model represents. All right, I went off script. Back to the script. And let's, well, I'll let it run while I'm talking. Well, I don't want to distract you. So over time, both the greens and blues continue to outcompete the totally selfish. Now, in my script, I was like, maybe that 9 times out of 10 or the 1 times out of 10 will happen. The majority of the time you run this model, you should also see totemism outcompeting ancestor worship as well. Keep in mind, these models are completely random in terms of movement and placement of resources. Running this model on your own, or me being unlucky, You, you may find those who practice totemism don't outcompete ancestor worshipers, but again, the majority of the time they do, and they almost always outcompete the selfish. Hopefully, after watching the ancestor worship video, you know what some of these other knobs and buttons do. Off script, I had to do the start fire button to show the effect a decrease in accessibility to resources has on those who can more adequately share or share more effectively. Try to see if there are any circumstances where being able to identify more sharing partners from further away isn't an advantage. Sharing only helps when there are those in need. If there is a plethora of resources, we would expect the ancestor worshipers and totemism agents to do relatively the same in terms of population size. Anyway, this model shows that being able to identify more sharing partners from further away is generally a more adaptive strategy than the unembellished ancestor worship strategy. Just so I can say that it's a majority, 2 out of 3 is a majority, so let's roll it one more time, just so I'm not lying to you guys. Oh yeah, and the blues have right off the bat come out on top. Wherever they were randomly placed, whether it was closer to resources or not, again, this is all random, but this strategy shows to be effective. And again, I'm looking at this marker here. We would expect the greens to eventually overtake the reds. Again, it's only been 6 reproductive cycles. All right, 2 out of 3, that's not bad. But again, also keep in mind in the first model, the second I decimated the resources, the totemism faction came out on top. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. This is the second of 4 religious behavior models I've created for Anthropology 216. And I will see you next time when we are talking about shamans.